Good morning, good afternoon, hello. Thanks for being here. My name is Gerardo Macias with DHR Executive Search. I'm based in Monterrey, Mexico, and today we have amazing guests. But before that, uh, we have also Kara Lynn with our division Jobplex. Um, in general, DHR, by the way, we've been around more than 30 years. We were founded in Chicago, in the US, and we solve talent challenges for our clients, for companies around the world. Kara, nice to see you again.
You as well, Gerardo. I hope it's nice and warm in Mexico, and it's good to collaborate with you again today.
Yeah, thank you so much. And to the audience, thanks for being here. And please feel free to comment or write down any questions that you have. We have people on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube today. So, please go ahead. And Kara, please introduce our guests.
I will do that, Gerardo. It's wonderful that we've got three very advanced, very mature, accomplished statisticians with us today, all representing diverse career paths. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion. And I'll just jump right in and introduce our first panelist. We're going to start with a person who is, and you'll figure out very quickly who this is a fellow of the American Statistical Association, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the Society for Clinical Trials. She's an elected member of the International Statistical Institute. She's a past editor-in-chief of Controlled Clinical Trials. She is the recipient of the Janet L. Norwood Award for Outstanding Achievement by a Woman in the Statistical Sciences, and was awarded the W.J. Dixon Award for Excellence in Statistical Consulting. Quote, listen to all of these things that she was awarded this award for quote, exceptional contributions to advancing the science and art of statistical consulting and collaboration, for developing innovative, widely used statistical methodology, for major worldwide accomplishments, especially in the area of clinical trials, including performing creative, easily interpretable interim analyses and serving on numerous data and safety monitoring boards, for extraordinary leadership as president of Statistics Collaborative, and for being a true beacon of integrity, end quote. This panelist earned her PhD in statistics from Harvard University. She worked in academia at Columbia University, at Hunter College of the City University of New York, did postdoctoral research at the National Cancer Institute, and was chief of the Biostatistics Research Branch of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. She then founded the consulting firm Statistics Collaborative and built it into one of the most reputable statistical consulting firms in the world, selling it in 2020 to WCG. She continues to be a statistical consultant, and she lives in the Washington, D.C. area with her husband. Of course, I'm talking about the one and the only, the incomparable, Janet Wittes. Welcome, Janet.
Well, thank you, Kara. I mean, it's very hard to hear about oneself because it doesn't feel like the person one is, right? I love the way you talked about the three of us being mature. That's a very nice way of saying we're old. So,
Me too.
so I'm delighted to be here. And I think what you're going to hear from all three of us is different experiences. And I think the lesson to everybody is live with your own experiences. You're not going to copy anybody else's, but as you hear about how we made different decisions over time to be consistent with our lives and the politics of the time, you'll see that you make decisions as you go. And it's very hard to predict in the future, predict your path, your future path.
Ah, yes, that's going to come up again and again. By the way, speaking of being mature, I want to point out, we may have some disagreements here today. Three people who are all successful, but may see things just a little differently. And part of our job as mature people, so it's not all just we're old, but we do have experience, is we need to model to others how in this society do we have differences of opinion and do it with civility. So that's something that we're going to be hopefully seeing in this discussion. So Janet, just a couple quick questions for you before I go to the next panelist. One thing that's unique about you, in addition to the fact that you're such a warm, lovable human being, and that's just the engagement that we had on LinkedIn from the feature we did on you, was it broke records. And everybody was just so, happy to be able to express their gratitude to you and their affection for what, you've meant to them over the years. And so one thing that, I have noticed also in many years I've known you is that you're so genuine, so real. And when we talk about statistics and statisticians, they're often so objective. They're so, being trusted with all the facts and they have to be careful. We don't often see the human side. And I'm going to invite that to come out in our discussion today because it helps people, I think, get more out of the discussion. And Janet, one thing that's unique about your humanity is what you went through, having gone, I guess this is an age theme in a way too. You went through your PhD program probably as I think maybe the only woman at Harvard in your PhD program at the time, late 60s. And we just came off of Women's History Month, and you've basically made history in all that you've accomplished. But there have been challenges and difficulties along the way, and you have navigated those with grace. I think it'd be just a kind of human interest story to hear you tell a little bit about what it was like. Maybe you could tell about those weekly statistical seminars and what you were supposed to do during those.
Oh, I'd be happy to. So first of all, I was not the only woman, but I will tell you this. When I was, there were 10 of us in our PhD class, and I was the only woman in that class, but there had been other women before me. And I noticed, I was watching as I saw people, my first 2 years, I saw them, everybody's third year, they spent time looking for a thesis. And I thought, oh, that doesn't make any sense. I'll go work, because my husband and I were married. He was in medical school. We were paying his tuition. And I went to my advisor, who was not very supportive of me, to say the least. And you'll hear about my tea story. And I said I wanted to take the third year off and get a job, and I'd find my thesis during that year. And you can't see my right hand. He opens the drawer with his right hand, his drawer of his desk, and he flicks his finger along the files, and he says, "These are the women I accepted." And then he pulls out one, and he said, "And this is the woman who finished." That was actually Janet Dixon Ellishoff. And he said, "I can't prevent you from taking a year off, and I can't prohibit you from coming back, but I really don't recommend it." But I took my year off, and it be back in. The story that Kara is alluding to is every Tuesday at 4:00, the department had a seminar. And my 2 years there, since I was the only woman in the two classes, and I don't know why it should have been the woman, but it was, I was in charge of tea and coffee. And so I had to get the cookies. I had the money from the department. I had to distribute them on the plates. I had to make the tea and make the coffee. And then when it was time for the seminar, everybody left to go to the seminar room, and I had to stay and clean the dishes. So when I finally finished cleaning the dishes, and I would come and sit down at the seminar, and those of you who've been in statistics seminars know they're not so easy. I always missed the beginning. I missed what the seminar was about. And then at the end, the chairman would ask me the first question, and I could never answer them. And one of my fellow students got up and he said, "Why do you do this to her? You make her clean the dishes, and then you ask her a question, and you know she can't." So that was my life in my department. But I found people who were very supportive. My thesis advisor, Ted Colton, was wonderful to me. I hung out at the School of Public Health, and they were wonderful. The students I was with. So as long as I could negotiate away from the people who didn't like the fact that I was married, didn't like the fact that I had 2 babies during the course of my career, during the course of my graduate school. I was fine.
Wow. So that's so inspirational, Janet, because you, as I said, you do everything with such style and grace. You're one of the few people who probably had the ability to finish your PhD, even though you took your 3rd year off and then went back. It's very difficult to do. Your professor probably knew that it was unlikely that a person would normally finish if they did that. So he's probably in his harsh way trying to help you, but you take lemons, those lemons that you had along the way, and you've made them into lemonade. And now look at you, you've blown most everybody out of the water in what you've achieved. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you, Karen.
Totally.
Yeah, we really, really appreciate that. So hold on for just a second. I'll come back to you in a couple minutes, Janet. I'm going to now introduce our next panelist. And this gentleman is a founding member of the Bay Area Biofarm Statistics Workshop in San Francisco and served as its president in 2022. He began his career at Abbott Laboratories and then Eli Lilly after earning his PhD in statistics with a minor in genetics from UCLA School of Public Health and completing a postdoc research fellowship at Columbia. He then joined the world's first biotech company, Genentech, where he added his talent to the scientific innovation for which they are known. He then became Global Innovation Challenge Leader in Product Development Innovation at Roche, and later Head of Strategic Partnerships and Strategic Innovation. At that point, he joined his first startup company, saw how brutal that business can be, went back to Roche for a couple of years, and then joined his second startup company, MyoKardia. This time, he saw what can go right at a startup. He built the advanced analytics capabilities from the ground up, built up his department, and contributed to an important NDA submission, which was approved and resulted in a $13 billion acquisition by Bristol Myers Squibb. He then worked for Bristol Myers briefly before joining yet another early stage company, Alumis Inc., where he is now Senior Vice President and Head of Biometrics and Data Management. And as a member of the founding management team, also served as Chief Information Officer. A warm welcome, I don't know where that phone is, or I would turn it off. A warm welcome to our next panelist, David Zhang. Welcome, David.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kara. It is an honor to be on this panel. In fact, I was just thinking, Janet was introduced. She's at the pantheon of practicing biostatisticians these days. So to be on the same panel with her is such an honor. In fact, I had several interactions with her. One was at Genentech when she was our data coordinating center for a number of DMCs. Another is at the FDA workshop for heart failures at FDA. And then the other was at BBSW. She was our keynote speaker in 2021. So Janet, I guess we just can't get away from each other too far, right?
Well, it's always good to be with you.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. Well, David, what makes you really special to me as a human, this human side of the statisticians that we're talking about today, is that you are very enthusiastic, outgoing, energetic. You're passionate about innovation and leadership. You're just one of the biggest personalities that I've met in my career. And the passion that you have for what you do and what you contribute is very palatable. And you have also, this is number 2 thing that makes you uniquely human, you have stepped out and been willing to take risks that make most people scared to death. So I wonder if you could just maybe talk to us for a minute, David, about what does it feel like, or what has it felt like for you as you've taken risks like that with startup companies, and what makes it worthwhile for you?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Kara. I think this is not necessarily my nature to begin with when I entered into this profession. As you observed, I spent a long time in a large pharma company, several large pharma companies, 15 years. So I was not, in fact, that risk taker as a born nature as a person. However, I realized at the course of learnings and self-realization and seeing the models that I respect, I think the real failure in life is failure to try. And I realized that you have to give a try at one point when you are the most fear. And that is the time when probably is the time you feel that is time you are most prepared to go for a swing. And perhaps later we can explore why I haven't done that earlier and what prevented me from doing that, and why I feel now is a prime time to do that for a lot of folks. So, but
Okay.
to answer your question, it's not my nature to begin with, but I really enjoyed it after done that.
That's wonderful. Perfect setup for what's to come. Thank you, David. And let's move on to our final finalist, panelist. And so thank you, David. Our next panelist is someone who has worked in the pharmaceutical industry for more than 20 years as a non-clinical statistician, as opposed to clinical. He started out with the Kellogg Company in Battle Creek, Michigan, supporting manufacturing, laboratory, and financial divisions. And then he later pretty quickly joined Pfizer, which was then called Parke-Davis, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where he supported early discovery efforts via designed experiments and exploratory data analysis. After 8 years and the closure of the Pfizer Ann Arbor site, he switched from chemistry-driven activities, or what we call small molecule work, to large molecule or biologics work. He is currently a director within the statistics group at Pfizer, supporting efforts from cell line development to process characterization, all the way to specification setting, regulatory submission, and queries. He has a master's degree and a PhD in statistics from Purdue University, and some of his interests include design of experiments, teaching statistical concepts, and graphical display data. Welcome, Brad Evans.
Thank you, Kara. I feel I'm in the rare air here, so thank you for including me on this panel. And it's sort of like 25 years since grad school, and it feels very short, in a way. So we got put in the mature bucket, but in some ways I don't feel it in other ways. But other than the time goes fast.
Yeah, that's really a good point. So, Brad, what I wanted to ask you just to get started with your introduction is, not everybody has an exposure to what non-clinical statisticians do. And so for the sake of those people who might be watching this presentation, I just wondered if you could try to give us your most exciting description of what non-clinical statisticians do.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we save people from themselves. You might say that if you want something provocative. But I guess I would say, in contrast to clinical, where you have, with thalidomide and FDA and pivotal trials, and you're sort of required to have a statistician, involved in those planning of those trials. In the world where I work, that's not actually required. I mean, any pharma could say, no, we don't want any statisticians, or we don't need them. We'll hire more chemists, more biologists. So I think you're trying to help people make decisions, plan better experiments, use their resources better. So it's I kind of often have this Venn diagram of, you have a business and you have science and you have statistics, and you're trying to find where those worlds, converge, so you can help people with a decision they have to make, versus a more theoretical answer that isn't really practical, or an experiment that's too big or too unwieldy, or they just may not have the time to do what you'd prefer to do. So I often say we don't do homework problems. Mm-hmm. So it goes from your graduate school, this is the answer, and I put a box on it, and hopefully it comes back with 100%. But, data is messy and decisions have to be made. So that's kind of where we try to contribute, by knowing the science, knowing the business, of course, knowing the statistics, but putting all those together.
Okay. I'm sure that we'll get more color to that added as we carry further into the conversation here. So thank you for sharing that, Brad. Sure. And I'd like to ask you, I'm going to ask everybody to answer this question, and then I'll go back and get your explanations for it. So Brad, as you look at your career that you've had so far, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being horrible and 5 being perfect, 1 to 5, how would you rate your career? Just a number for now.
Interesting.
Can I say a high 4s?
Yep, you can say that.
Yeah.
You can slice and dice numbers any way you want. You're a
we'll say a high 4.
Okay,
4,
so
7, 4, 8.
Hold on a second. I'm going to come back to you, Janet. Scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being terrible and 5 being perfect. How would you rate your career?
Today, I would say 4.
Okay, and then David, same question.
Right now, I would say a 5.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
Now let's go back to keep in mind, everybody that's listening to this we're talking career path here. 3 totally different career paths. So Brad, you are representing the non-clinical statistician who stayed with pretty much one company your whole career, and you just rated yours 4+. Why?
Because most every day is great, and I help people and play with data. And then there's other days where they close your site and fire all your friends. So, sometimes it's people, sometimes it's structure, and sometimes it's data, and sometimes the data.
Okay.
The easy part, the part we love, the part we understand, but you run into people and structures and barriers and whims and that kind of thing too. So.
Okay. So it's interesting. It's close. What would make it a 5 would be maybe just if it were a utopia where nobody ever got fired and.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to dwell on that, but corporate restructuring is very prevalent. I'm probably the rare exception that stayed with one company this long, and it's you don't get it till you go through it.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for your answer. Now I'd like to hear Janet's answer. I think she said a 4.
I said a 4. There's a couple of reasons. One is I never like to judge at the edges, so it's very hard for me to say something is perfect. So 4. But also, I've had 3 jobs that I absolutely loved. I loved when I was teaching at Hunter. I loved the students. I didn't love the bureaucracy, but I loved the teaching. I never would have left. And then when I went to NHLBI and became the branch chief there, I thought that was heaven. It was the most wonderful job I could have imagined, even though sometimes I missed the teaching. And then when I started Statistics Collaborative, I had a wonderful time. But there were other jobs in between that were not so good. And so if I say, what about the whole trajectory? There were some short parts. I never let them be long because when I recognized that it wasn't what I wanted, I was out. But perfect is too hard to be. I think a 4 is pretty strong and pretty positive.
Oh, very good. Okay. And David, how do you explain why you rated yours a number 5?
Yeah, there are a couple of reasons. I think it's different than what Janet says, but it's somewhat related to what Brad said. I think in my case, I think a lot of things that as a career statistician, I feel that I have achieved at this point, in somewhat satisfaction. However, I have a couple of things I still feel that I need to fulfill. Number 1 is skill sets. I still have a lot of skills as a leader, as a wholesome person, I need to learn. And that's why I had still a long journey ahead of me. And secondly, I read a book by Arthur Brooks called From Strength to Strength. And he highlighted there are really 2 curves in one's life. One is your first curve, your main career. And the second curve comes in later in your first career, but jumping to the second one, which is your passion. And I think in this case, what I really wanted to explore is the second curve, where I can put my energy and passion and knowledge and experience to that. And I feel that I'm still at the beginning of that. That's why I rate a 5.
Okay, very optimistic. You're the optimist. You are the glass more than half full guy. I love that about you. All right, so now here's another question. I'm going to ask Brad this question first. If Brad, finish this statement. If I had known at the beginning of my career what I know now, I would have done blank differently.
Yeah, I think on that one, just it's actually kind of tied to David's the two careers. Planning a longer horizon and that could be anything. It could be your own career. It could be where do you want to be when you grow up in 5 years. It could be how you organize your files and stuff. You're like, oh, I did that 6 years ago. Where did I put it? I can't find it. So a little longer, of a horizon look. Probably, I think is good advice for anybody when you're young and you're fired up. You're just doing. You can't step away from yourself as well. And I think that's kind of where David was going with that second part. Because I put some notes. It's like you start out, well, this is what you're told to do. But then you figure out, yeah, but can I get a job where I get to do what I want to do? Where you can kind of shape it. So, you want to think about that.
Okay.
You might be skilled, but are you enjoying it? They're not. You could be skilled at something you don't really love.
Right. Very true. Janet, what would you say to that question?
That's such a hard question. And when I said before that today I'm giving it a 4, the answer to this question would be different on different. This current question would be different on different days, just like my score would be different. I think I had no idea how much I loved running a company. And so I do regret that I didn't do that earlier. On the other hand, I loved being at NHLBI. So doing it earlier would have meant curtailing something that I loved. So I don't know. I think my big regret is similar to David's, but I think for me it's even more acute. There's a lot of areas of statistics that I'm not good at and I don't know, and I wish I did, and I wish I had had the time and energy to keep more up to date than I have. That's my biggest regret.
That's interesting. So I've got another question that's sort of a follow-on to this one. I don't want to exclude you, David, if you have anything else to add, though. So if you don't, we'll go on to that. And if you do, go ahead.
Very similar to Janet. The sort of like the torn between staying in an environment where you're comfortable and you're contributing to try something very exciting, and then where do you make the jump? I think that was the kind of timing we talk about. The regret that I might have is similar.
That's great, because the next question is related to timing. The question is timing everything? I think we're probably all going to agree, yes. So I'm not going to ask each of you to answer that. But then the next part of it gets to, what's the best way to kind of try to plan and navigate your career? Not everybody plans it out step by step. I mean, a lot of us, jump in somewhere and then we see where it takes us. But I've noticed that some people try to force themselves ahead and up the ladder as fast as they can. And when you do that, I think you miss certain preparations and skills and experience and maturity that you may need at that next step. And I think sometimes people do themselves a disservice that way. And as I think about that, I think about Janet and how a lot of us don't, if we haven't gone on Wikipedia or we haven't researched Janet's background, we wouldn't have known. She spent 20 years doing a bunch of things before she started her company, Statistics Collaborative. Janet, if you had started Statistics Collaborative before you had that critical mass of experience, how well do you think you would have, how successful do you think it would have been?
Well, I think it would have been a failure. But I think my career is actually complicated by the fact of family. So why did we go to Bethesda in the beginning? It was because of Vietnam. My husband was in the Yellow Berets, which was the medical corps for Vietnam, and he was at NIH. Why did we move to New York? I eventually went to Hunter because my mother had died and we wanted to be close to my father. Why did I go to NHLBI? Because Bob said it's my turn to go to where you want to go. So it wasn't as if I planned a career, but it was the junctures of decision making was very much related to the family. But there's no question in my mind that starting Statistics Collaborative when I knew lots of people from those previous 20 years, and I was no longer afraid to talk in public, which I was for the first 20 years of my career. So I was in, for me, in an ideal situation to start something. And at that point, our kids had finished college. So I wasn't in the financial bind that we would have been when they were still in college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, and you didn't plan your career. When you finished your PhD, you didn't say, okay, now I'm going out to conquer the world and here's how I'm going to do it, right?
I had no idea. It was just finding one position after another in a way that was consistent with where we had to live.
Yeah.
Right.
So some people try to force their careers ahead, I think, quicker than they should. And it kind of flies in the face of that. There's an old saying that says, we will serve no wine before it's time. If you try to serve your wine as a statistician before your time, you might just really have some failures that you will wish later that you hadn't experienced. It's better to do things, in a different progression. And so, Brad and David, how would you like to weigh in on that question?
Yeah, I think, and it's kind of similar to Janet, you're shaped by your experience, right? And sometimes that experience is like, I love this, I want to do more of this. And sometimes it's like, I don't want to do that again. And you don't know until you try. And I think in statistics, unless you're in an academic kind of a more narrow research world that is in your control a bit more, you will wander, and it could be jobs, it could be companies, it could be positions within a company. But I think that experience, is part of it. And there's another saying, it's like, we make plans and God laughs, or something, to that effect, that it's not always as in control as we might wish it to be anyway, for people that are more, that have a 15-year plan the day they're born.
Right. So let's keep peeling this envelope, or peeling this onion a little bit. Thank you, Brad, because it's all like about doing what's right for you. It's about balance. It's about just trying your best and correcting from there. There's no really right or wrong answers. And one thing people do sometimes is they try to push themselves forward before they're ready. But sometimes people, out of fear or whatever, hold back longer than they should. And David, you and I, when we've been talking about your career, you've said to me, maybe I should have taken the risk a little sooner than I did. So that relates to this timing issue as well. What would you have to share about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so actually just get back to what last Brad just said about plans, is that really plans are useful. So I remember General Eisenhower once said, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. So what we are talking about is you can put out the most beautiful plan on the universe, and it doesn't always pan out the way how you think. But what actually important is the planning. Planning includes building the skills, building the necessary knowledge, building the networks. These are the planning steps. And that is really the fertile ground of how we grow our careers. And I think I probably ignored some of these elements at the beginning. I probably what mostly focused on was building the knowledge and the experience, but probably ignored the skills and the network side. And that makes one to move to the next, probably a better satisfaction career is a little harder, because without that, we cannot achieve what we wanted. So answer your question, the timing. I think I was complacent for a long time in a large, very, very reputable company because I just felt, where do I need to go? Well, I have a hundreds of peer statisticians that are world class in my reach, and I don't really need to go anywhere to get all the things I need to know, and even the skills that I can learn from them. But what I ignored was you are in an ecosystem of echo chamber of yourself. You are not hearing anything that outside world is telling you once you are in that enclosed environment. And I felt that if I had realized that much earlier and also get over the fear of going to an unknown world of small companies and outside of these large company ecosystem, I would have known a lot more faster because that's just the way how this kind of career trajectory works. It's moved so fast outside than inside. So if I had to do it again, I would have done that much earlier.
That's great. Now I'll keep you for a second. What's the best advice someone's ever given you?
I think it's just that the one word to say is that the real failure in life is failure to try. I think that probably summarizes everything that I feel that's valuable.
That is great. Yes.
Yeah. How about you, Brad? What's the best advice anyone's ever given you?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd quite put this advice, but maybe more viewpoint. Since I'm in the non-clinical and we're not regulated in, and my first boss says, "Oh, it'll take you about a year to figure out what's going on." And I was sort of like, "Well, why did you hire me if you think I'm that slow on the take?" But it was, and it's kind of tied with David's comment about network and people and where is the power in your company and who calls the shots. And you don't learn any of that in graduate school, right? You learn tools and problem solving. Another one, Tom Vidmar, as you know, Kara, is your relationship with the scientist, with the customer, with the client, whichever word you'd prefer to use. That's a big deal in non-clinical, because if they don't trust you or they don't think you understand their world, they'll just keep the data to themselves.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, so I think those two, and those were both pretty early on, but it's more of a framework of how to look at it than advice, but I think it aligns with what you're getting at.
It does, definitely. Thank you. Janet, I'd like your input on that as well.
So I had a conversation that actually changed my whole outlook on what I was what I as a statistician was supposed to do. It was when I first came to NHLBI, and I was very afraid to talk in an audience, in a meeting. I was not afraid to get up in front of a lecture because I'd done that at Hunter, but to talk in a meeting in an interactive way, I was terrified. And we had a meeting with with Genentech. It was a meeting with EPA, and I was listening to all the discussion, and I didn't say a word because I was too afraid. And at the end, I went to the head of Jean Passamani, who was the head of what was then the Division of Heart and Vascular Disease, DHVD, and I told him a lot of things that I was thinking. And he looked at me and he said, "Janet, if you tell me this in private, I can't use it at all. You have to say these things in public." And I was panicked because I understood that he was right, and that was my job to figure out how to say things in public when I was afraid I was going to say something stupid.
And that's one of the things that now you're an expert at. I mean, the feedback I get from people when I, am talking to them and your name comes up is, "Oh my God, she's such a great speaker. She's so good at presenting information." And, you just exude that confidence level that really that's what a statistician should hope for, right?
But that was a learned skill that did not come naturally, and I forced myself to learn.
Wow, that's great to hear. I would think that would be a good case to be made right there for some mentoring. Like, let's say somebody's in the same boat, but you can't just, not everybody could just instill or work on that skill on their own and master it. But with the help of a mentor, somebody that can continue to give you a feedback loop, you could really make great strides. All right. So what about this question? A PhD is imperative to success in your career. Yes or no first, and then we'll come back for your longer answers, because there may be a difference of opinion here. Yes or no, a PhD is imperative to your career success. Janet?
No.
I knew you'd say that. David?
No.
I didn't think you'd say that. Brad?
No.
Oh wow, you guys all surprised. Well, all but Janet. I had her right, but the rest I didn't. Brad, you're up on the full screen, so give us your reason for
Yeah, it's interesting because, nobody asked me what they might ask if they get to know me a little bit, but like the first time I meet with somebody, they don't say, "Are you a PhD? Did you go to a good stat school?" And they probably wouldn't know what a good stat school is from a good science school, from a good engineering school. So I do think you could have structural limitations at your own company. If you want to lead the toxicology statistics where it's a little more regulated, PhD could be a deal breaker. But for the most part, it's what you bring, and do you get it, and do you help people? So that's why I would say that.
Okay.
I guess one other, even though I said no, but I interviewed at DuPont years ago when I was less mature, and they said, we like to hire PhDs, sometimes not even in the field of the job, because they've learned how to dig.
Okay.
So there's diggers without PhD, but if you got a PhD, you probably had to dig.
Okay. Thank you. Now, before we get the next two answers to that question, I just want to interject here that even though we will all agree that there are people who are master's level statisticians who are exceptional, what I've seen in my career is that when it comes to hiring time, almost all the time my clients say, has to have a PhD, especially if it's a high level position. And I can take them somebody who has a tremendous dossier in terms of FDA submissions and approvals and direct interaction at the FDA. And I'm still told, nope, we're not going to consider that person because they don't have a PhD. This is one reason I asked the question. The other reason is, people are watching this, some of whom might be thinking about getting a PhD, or they might still be in a master's program, and they might benefit. It's not just about whether we think they should have one and that they need it to be successful or to be good, but it's another thing, like how will it affect your career and how will it affect your job prospects? So I want to introduce those elements too. And now we'll go to either Janet or David for their input about this. Jump right in. Don't hold back.
Okay, so my perspective is if you are doing the theoretical work in either institution or in pharma companies, I do think a PhD give you a lot of advantage. Like Brad said, there is a perhaps skills on how to think logically, how to think deeply, what is the methodologies of doing research. That PhD, years of PhD work does actually pave the way for that. The other part I think the PhD offers is what, Carol, you just mentioned about perhaps there are certain roles that are, they require PhD, whether that's right or wrong, that's just the nature of the business, right? And as well as the networks that you have, perhaps there's different. So only these, I think that perhaps PhD will make a difference, but really what makes difference is the skills, the knowledge, the general experience that, and how you approach the problems. And that, I think you don't need a PhD for doing that.
Okay. Thank you. Janet.
So I'm going to answer a little bit differently from the other two. I totally agree with everything people said, but I don't want to downplay how much more difficult it is to get into the position that one might want without a PhD. So while it's while if you have all the qualities that both David and Brad talked about, you can go pretty far without a PhD. It is just plain harder. And in the clinical setting where I am, where you're dealing with MDs, MDs are very, very degree conscious. But I think what you have to ask yourself is, and this is in contrast to what we talked about before, but what do you want to do ultimately? How high up in the organization do you want to go in the technical part of the organization? And if your goal is not to lead a group, and if your goal is not to do fundamental statistical research, then this is fine. But don't think if you have two people who are qualified exactly the same way, and one has the PhD and one does not, the one with the PhD is going to have advantages.
Right. It's okay. Those are great answers. Thank you. Really helpful. So there's a mistake that people have communicated to me over the course of my career that on more than one occasion, people have communicated that they think they've made a mistake and they need a little help in the future. And I think that you guys could give some information that would help people with this kind of decision. It's a scenario where somebody has a good amount, at least 10 or 15 years of experience as a statistician, predominantly clinical in biotech or pharma, and then they take a position where they will be the first biostatistician in to a company. So generally it's a director level position, and they're taking on the full responsibility for the entire department, and there's a lot of issues surrounding that. But what I have had people come back and tell me is, I took this job, I thought that I would finally have like a position of influence where I would be in a smaller company and I'd be the one they would come to, and I'd be strategically consulted. And then I got in there and I found out they didn't want to invite me into the executive level meetings. They just did everything, on their own. And then they just sent me the orders of what they wanted me to do. And these people have been very unhappy about that. So the question is, and David, you and I've talked about this a little bit because you've struggled with it also. Like, the question is, how do you effectively evaluate an opportunity, especially one like that? What do you do in order to try to really make sure that you're making the decision that will work for you?
Yeah.
David, you probably should go first.
Sure. I sorry if I interrupted you, Kara.
No, not at all.
But I think you are asking two questions, perhaps. One is, how do you evaluate a company before you join, whether that's the right company to join, if you have a choice? Number two is,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, David, but especially if it's a small company,
right,
and it's not a typical role.
That's right.
Okay, go ahead.
But I think the second question is, once you're in the company, how do you make influences that beyond what people perceive what you can deliver? Is that kind of the gist that you are thinking? Which one you want to explore first before
you're doing what a statistician is supposed to do. You guys, all of you're supposed to get the data so that the problem can be solved, right? So that's what you're doing. What I'm really getting at in this question is, how does a person find out about the company before they take the job, whether they are going to be listened to if they take that job? That's really the question.
Yeah, good. So I think knowing what I know now after being three small companies, I think the number one, and that's clear number one, and the most important part is the people part. So you have to spend a lot of time looking into the leadership of the company as well as the coworkers, and that is determining so much of your effectiveness and happiness at a company. Unlike in large companies, when you have so many touch points and there are so many places, people that you have interactions with within a company, In a small company, it's only a handful. It's just a few people and then yet everyone in the company knows you and you know them. So you really have to invest time in understanding the people, especially at leadership level, because they determine in a very short period of time how company goes. My first job at a small company was actually quite a learning for me. I joined the company because I like the product. I feel like they are very innovative in that regard. But I did not spend time on investigating the traits of the leaders. And that resulted a very short period. I was there for 9 months. And in fact, the company no longer exists as of today. So they essentially completely go bankrupt. So I think the leadership is so important. Number two is the finance. So you want to investigate how long is the runway, the company. You don't want to be a company that depend totally on others, whether the partnership is going to, because partner can go away anytime. So you don't want to invest or go into the company that is completely dependent on others without a longer 2 to 3 years of runway.
Okay, that's great. Great advice. And I'm sure there's many more things, but in the interest of time, let's go to Brad next and Janet finally on this one.
Yeah, I do think, it's people. In general, people quit their boss more than they quit their company. And so I think that's what David's getting at. And the smaller the company, I think the more extreme personality can survive and have that influence, good or bad, on your career. So I think it's the people. I've never interviewed at a real small company, so I don't have much more to add to that.
All right. Thank you, Brad. Janet, what are your thoughts on this?
So I understood your question a little differently. I understood your question as asking, what is it like to be what I call an isolated statistician, a statistician, the only statistician in the company, or I would say the only statistician in the unit within the company, or even in academics, the only statistician within a department. I have very strong feelings about this. I don't know if the rest of you agree, but I would say if you get that kind of a job, don't take it. That there will always be a first statistician there, so maybe those of you who are risk takers, but I think it's really hard. We statisticians, part of our job is to tell people what they're doing wrong, which is not a very popular thing. I mean, we have to be, we're always looking to see where's the bias, where's the fault, where are the errors. And if you're the only one doing that, in a group of forceful people who think they're right, that's a very hard position to be in. And people that I have known who try that have been, I don't know anyone who's happy in those positions, except those who come in at a high level and are told, I want you to build a statistics department. That's a whole different story. But if you're to come in and be the isolated statistician within a department, I think it's, even if the people when you interview seem really nice, I think it's a really hard to be.
That's interesting. Well, Janet, isn't it true that this just occurs to me as I hear you answering the question? Isn't it true that many of the people that you have consulted with, the companies that you have helped, have been companies that might be at that stage, but instead of hiring a lone statistician to come in full time to the company, they would hire your company or you as the consultant to do, a lot of the things that need to be done statistically.
Yes.
But they respect you because you know what I mean? It's a different respect level.
But what I do in those situations, if I know there's a statistical group, even one statistician, I will say, I will be the consultant to the statistician. I don't want to be the consultant to the physician, and then I'm put in a position of being in an adversarial position to the statistician. I want to be part of the statistical group. And that can work because then they feel they have support. But I don't ever want to be unless they have an incompetent person, but usually the people are competent, but are overwhelmed by the authority of the people above them.
That's so good. That just shows maturity in terms of real like value, that like this person has learned things and knows how to work with people and has good leadership. There's so much, that comes into this whole question. And that's why it was a difficult one for us to wrap our arms around. And David, you were right on track by saying, well, what are you really asking here? A lot of questions in life are not simple questions, and that's why we need statisticians. Now, my colleague, Gerardo, has some questions also. Gerardo, please.
Yeah, thank you, Kara. And I mean, thanks again to our guests. I mean, these are just amazing answers that, correlate a lot to many other industries, of course. I mean, here we deal with clients all over the world in different sectors or industries. But my first question goes back a little bit more in regards to taking charge of your career. I mean, you all have mentioned a little bit about that. But I think it comes down to that, right? To making your own decisions. Of course, having a plan is good, like David mentioned. That's always essential, for sure. But in any function or industry, it's always about that, raising your hand and just deciding what's your next step. Who has any comments about that?
Yeah, I can take a shot. So my first job, our annual review was key results. That's what they called it. And like year one, it was, did you do the regression correctly? Did you check the assumptions? But as it evolved, became a given, right? Like you didn't get a lot of points for doing, you got points for, did you do more than they wanted? Did you put it into their context? Did you take it from a homework problem to a business solution? So in some ways, like doing more, doing preemptive is one way you can say like, wow, that person really gets it, as opposed to like, here's your answer, I'm going to go to lunch. So I think, seeing yourself in that role is part of it. If you put yourself in this narrow box of like, we're often called number crunchers, which sort of annoys me, but that's different. But if you allow yourself to be seen as only that, you're only going to be that.
You're right. So I'd like to add on to what Brad said. One of the things that I heard from the CEOs to us about statistician is they see us as really a kind of a number-driven and very truth and a fact-based profession, which is right and is correct, and I think is an honor. However, they said what we lack is the ability to see from, he called it, from outside in. So we only see things from inside out, meaning we see from our perspective, this is how things should be, and this is data tells us. What he says is that we lack the ability, perhaps we need to build more abilities to see outside in, see how this world see us, and through that lens. So we need to train ourselves to be better at see from others' perspective, not just ourselves.
Yeah, and I'd like to add something to that. One of the things that as statisticians do that is bad is explain our methods in a way that basic humans can't understand. And I think one trick to be able to explain things in a way that non-technical people can understand is to remember when you couldn't understand something. When was it when you first did regression what was confusing to you. And if you can put yourself back in the mind of a student learning something for the first time, it becomes easier then to explain those same methods, to explain what you're doing to somebody else.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, just yeah.
Could I? There's a question that I had to finish with.
Well, I would only like to showcase a comment that we have here and
Okay,
go back
yeah.
to a question
I
about
just wondered if this was a good place to slip in one before we went on. But go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, Luis Eduardo mentioned in regards to having a PhD. It's interesting what he's commenting right now. He says, I mean, it's in regards to education level and income. There's a strong correlation between education level and income in the US. I mean, it's a long comment, but of course, I mean, I agree with him. You all mentioned that having a PhD is not necessary in your field, but it all depends on the purpose, right, that you have. Maybe if your purpose is to earn a lot of money, then you'll need a PhD, maybe. I mean, what do you think about this, Janet, that we have here right now?
Well, if your purpose is to earn a lot of money, think of Bill Gates. You don't need any degree. So, I think that should, well, I don't think that should be your purpose. Well, I mean, different people have different purposes, but if your purpose is to earn a lot of money, there are many better ways of doing it than becoming a statistician.
Okay.
I just want to, these guys, I know these guys well. I mean, I love that they all could come on to this platform together today. And I feel like a sister to them. Like, I know what they mean because I've been talking to them for years. And what I hear you guys saying is, you're not more valuable if you have a PhD than you are if you have a master's. It all just depends on how well you do your job. Yeah, you might make more money if you have a PhD. You might have more career opportunities or more opportunity to go up the ladder if you have the PhD. But it all really depends on, what's right for you and what do you want for your career.
True.
I love the fact that I've never seen any of these three people discriminate against someone or look down on them or be pretentious about them because they were a master's level statistician rather than a PhD level statistician.
Oh. No, and I think that also applies to any other industry, of course. I mean, talent is talent. So
yeah.
Well, just to mention, in terms of time, we are just over the hour. We have a few minutes. So please, to the audience, thank you for your comments right now. And if you have any questions, please go ahead, take advantage of this great panel that we have today.
So yeah, any questions? We'll get to them as
well,
long as they can.
We have several comments supporting Janet.
Okay. Of course, Janet.
Of course. That's awesome.
I do want to say something that none of us have said. Statistics is a wonderful field. It's very, it has, you can do all kinds of things. You can work with all different kinds of people. So those of you who are in statistics, stay. It's a really good place to be.
Yeah. I'd like to add to Janet. I think the statistician is really a wonderful career, and we enjoy so much respect. I can tell you firsthand, when Janet speaks at that FDA workshop for heart failures, all room of 100 or so physicians listen. They just quiet. They don't necessarily listen to each other, but they listen to Janet. So that just tells you how much weight and respect we have among the others. The other one I like to highlight, as the world moves on to AI-driven world and the things that are continue to evolve, we have to evolve ourselves. We cannot be living in the world of 20 years ago, and there's new skill sets we need. One of the things I like to highlight is to be able to connect the dots And we are very good at connecting the dots and finding what can work, what cannot, with seemingly siloed problems. So I encourage that the budding statisticians, pay attention to that kind of skills.
Good point.
Good.
You went to a question that I had, so you already kind of delved into that. That is, where is this field of statistics going? Where is it going in the future? What changes can we expect?
Yeah, I
Interesting.
think
Yeah, and maybe with ChatGPT and many other technologies, right? Maybe that applies to humans.
Yeah, I think it's getting bigger than ever. It's interesting. Like, some of us, I never used punch cards, but I know what they are, right? And that wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
And then, 20 years ago, everything was data warehouse, and that was around for a while. And now it's data science, right? If you get a degree in data science, you might make more than I make today with 20 years. So data is exploding. So I see a bigger and bigger role, but there's also the perception part of it, right? And so those hires that you talked about, Kara, they got into a new company, but then they really didn't have the seat at the table, right, that they needed to really influence. I think that's where your story was going. So there's a perception element which has to do with leadership and people skills and decision making and thinking bigger, thinking about the organization. So I think those skills on top of the technical will differentiate. There's lots of people that are book smart, and then there's other people that can talk to a CEO and a scientist and a regulator in the appropriate level, for each conversation.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
It's hard to predict the future, right? But I think what isn't hard to know is that, and I think both David and Brad said this, that your education isn't finished when you get your degree. You have to be learning constantly, because you don't know what the new methods will be. You don't know what the future will hold, and you have to be open to learning for the rest of your life.
Yeah, good point. Well, Gerardo, I know we are probably at that point now where we have
Yeah. I mean, let's close with this question from Lisa. She's asking, what's your biggest disappointment? But let's answer it from, maybe thinking about a challenge, that you've had or that you have right now. Let's finish up with Janet first.
Well, actually, my biggest disappointment right now is the state of the United States. And it has nothing to do with my profession or that. That's my biggest.
Okay.
Sorry, Lisa, that's not what you ain't like.
So
Okay.
I think it's, I don't have a, one concrete thing I would point to, but directionally it's sort of I believe the stats says this, and I believe the correct decision is A, and the project team has decided B. Where you really think the data says this and you were sort of overruled that sort of paradigm.
Yeah.
Thanks. David?
So I think for me, I would say more visibility and leaderships by the statisticians at a higher level in the company or in the government. That will be, I would say, currently we still lack.
Okay.
Great. Well,
Thank
thank you. I just want to thank you first, and then I'll turn it back to Gerardo. Thank you all to you guys for being here. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for your time. It's it's really great and really humbling to have the opportunity to meet you and also to interact with our audience. I am sure that we'll be organizing another conversation with you guys because there's so much that we can talk about. Thanks again, especially to the audience on behalf of DHR and Jobflex. And please feel free to keep commenting. I mean, this video will stay here on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So feel free to keep interacting with all of us. Kara, thanks again.
Thank you, Gerardo. Good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.